understand, see me after the service. Our sermon series for Lent is Questions Jesus Asked. Questions he asked of people who approached him, of people who wanted him to do something for them. Questions he asked of his followers, his disciples, and also of his opponents. In his teaching, especially in parables, he typically posed a specific question for his listeners. And many times when a question was directed to him, he often countered it with one of his own. With questions, Jesus led people to discover for themselves the truth of God's character and the message of the gospel. So our series will examine some of these questions and relate their significance to our own lives. The first question I've chosen is at the heart of the gospel and is reflected in our importance of observing Lent. It speaks of the essence of our relationship with God and our identity as followers of Jesus. The question is, what good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? What good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? One of the features of Mark's gospel is that he wants his readers to understand why Jesus had to die. One commentator actually described the entire gospel as a passion narrative, and passion is meant to summarize Jesus' suffering and death. That's what is meant by passion. So in other words, this commentator says the whole of Mark's gospel is one passion narrative with a prologue. In 3 consecutive chapters 8, 9, and 10, there's this interesting pattern in Mark's gospel. Jesus predicts his impending suffering, death, and resurrection, and in each instance, Mark follows that with some words or actions on the part of the disciples that reveal they don't get it, they don't understand. And then what follows that is Jesus correcting their misunderstanding, either in words or in some symbolic act. In each instance, Mark does this so that we as the readers do understand. We do get what this is all about and where this is leading. In today's passage, Jesus gives the first passion prediction. Peter then takes him aside, and what's important to know is just before that, remember Jesus has asked, "Who do people say that I am?" And then he says, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter answers and gets it right. So I don't know about you, but when I get it right, I'm full of myself for a little while. Just briefly, it goes away pretty quickly. But just in that one moment, I sort of think, if I got that right, then I must have everything right. And so when Jesus makes this prediction passion, Peter pulls him aside and says, "Lord, this is not going to happen." In essence, he's saying, "Not with me by your side. I won't allow it." And then Jesus looks over and sees his disciples, and he rebukes Peter. And then he calls the crowd to join his disciples to hear what he has to say. Whatever reason they might have had for following Jesus thus far, whether it was his compassion for people, his acts of healing, his teaching about God, he now challenges them to a whole new level of commitment. As we hear the reading of God's word from Mark 8:31 to 38, it may even give us pause in our claim to be a follower of Jesus. Let's hear the word of God.
Jesus then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed after 3 days, rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan," he said. "You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Then Jesus called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels." The word of the Lord.
Whatever view or feeling of Jesus you may have, the Gospel of Mark makes it clear he is God's Messiah who has come to give his life in exchange for ours, that we might be reconciled to God and to one another. Jesus' prediction of his suffering, death, and resurrection is as much about you and me as it is about him. Our identity and destiny is tied to his. We who were made in God's image and created to be in relationship with God and one another are invited to reevaluate who we are and what we live for in light of Jesus' words. Using an economic comparison of profit and loss, Jesus calls us to examine what we value and or squander with our lives. The longer I live, the more relevant Jesus' question has become. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for one's soul? Most of our life choices are not made with our soul in mind. Our pursuit of relationships, of work, of possessions, and our pursuit of happiness is seldom done for the benefit or care of our souls. More often than not, it's at the expense of this spiritual dimension of who we are. Someone has observed that we live a life of choice and then another life of living with the consequences of our choices. One of the reasons I continue to volunteer at Los Guilicos Juvenile Hall is to help the residents there know that they matter to God and that whatever their choice that they have committed or wrong they have done, their connection with God has not been forfeited or lost. I'm also profoundly aware of the choices I have made that maybe not has landed me behind bars or in a cell, but has been squandered nonetheless. I recently caught a portion of a TV show someone in my family was watching, and there was a man with his adult son approaching a parking lot kiosk in their car. And because they couldn't find their parking ticket, the father explained to the attendant that they had been in the lot only 1 hour and therefore handed him the $2 fee for parking there. But the attendant refused the money and pointed to a sign which read, "Lost ticket, $20. The son was about to hand the attendant the $20 bill, but his father blocked him and argued that he should only have to pay the $2. The attendant pointed again to the sign. At this point, the driver demanded to speak with his manager, and the attendant spun around and presented himself as the manager. and said, "That'll be $20. The father revved his engine and said, "If you don't take the $2 bill and open the gate, I'll drive through it." And the attendant refused. The father applied the accelerator, unaware that his car was in reverse. Instead of driving through the gate, he drove over tire spikes, puncturing all 4 of his tires. The son couldn't wait to point out that instead of a $20 parking expense, his father's choice was now going to cost him over $500 in new tires. Sometimes some mistakes we learn from are more costly than others, but nothing is as costly as forfeiting our soul. In his book, The Cost of Discipleship, Dietrich Bonhoeffer interprets Jesus' words about taking up our cross to follow him in this way. When Christ calls us, he bids us come and die. The cross is not the terrible end to an otherwise God-fearing, happy life. It meets us at the beginning of our call as we embark upon discipleship. We surrender ourselves to Christ in union with his death. As a youth, I thought to die to myself meant that I had to swap spiritual actions for my natural inclinations, such as giving up sleep to read my Bible and pray, or to not do something fun with my friends on a Friday night so I could do something sacrificial for God so that he would be proud of me. Denying my happiness in order to serve and please God. It wasn't until much later that I read C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity did the practice of dying to self finally make sense. Lewis addresses the question of whether Christianity is hard or easy, and this is what he says. Christ says, "Give me all. I don't want so much of your time or so much of your money or so much of your work. I want you. I have not come to torment your natural self, but to kill it. No half measures are any good. I don't want to cut off a branch here or a branch there. I want to have the whole tree down. Hand over the whole natural self, all the desires which you think innocent, as well as the ones that you think wicked, the whole outfit. I will give you a new self instead. In fact, I will give you myself. My own will shall become yours." Being a follower of Jesus does not require self-loathing, nor is it simply a self-improvement program, but it's an act of self-surrender. Lewis continues to clarify, the terrible thing, the almost impossible thing, is to hand over our whole self, all our wishes and precautions to Christ. But it's far easier than what we're trying to do instead. What we're trying to do is remain what we call ourselves, to keep personal happiness as our great aim in life, and yet at the same time to be good. We are all trying to let our mind and heart go their own way, centered on money or pleasure or ambition, and hoping in spite of this to have honestly and modestly reflected humility. But that's exactly what Christ warned us we could not do. A thistle cannot produce figs. Nothing we have not given away will ever be really ours. Nothing in us that has not died will ever be raised from the dead. Look for yourself, and you will find in the long run only hatred, loneliness, despair, rage, ruin, and decay. But look for Christ, and you will find him, and with him, everything else thrown in. In the ancient world, the cross was the primary tool of punishment and execution. But once it's used to execute Christ, it takes on a whole new meaning. Eugene Peterson says the cross represents the confrontation of our world of sin, hate, and indifference with God's demonstration of love, forgiveness, and power. Once Christ is nailed to the cross, this act of cruel torture and death becomes an act of incredible love and victory. God's love confronts human sin, and God's love wins. Born in Scotland, David Livingstone studied medicine and theology to become a medical missionary to go to China. But when it was closed due to some kind of an epidemic, he went to serve throughout the southern and central portions of Africa's continent. In 1857, he returned to England for a brief period and was invited to address a group of Cambridge students about his choice to lead a life of devotion, leaving behind the benefits of English life. He was asked if the sacrifice was worth it. This is his reply. People talk of the sacrifice I have made in spending so much of my life in Africa. Is that a sacrifice which brings its own blessed reward in healthful activity, the consciousness of doing good, peace of mind, and a bright hope of a glorious destiny hereafter? Away with the word in such a view and with such a thought. It is emphatically no sacrifice. Say rather, it is a privilege. Anxiety, sickness, suffering, danger, and with the foregoing of the common conveniences and charities of this life may give us pause and cause the spirit to waver. But let this only be for a moment. All these are nothing when compared with the glory which shall be revealed in and for us. I never made a sacrifice. In one of his temptations, Jesus is taken up by the enemy to view all the kingdoms of this world and their splendor. And the devil says to Jesus, this can all be yours because it's been given to me, if you just bow down and worship me. We might not be tempted to worship the enemy, but we're tempted by many other alternative idols in that regard. To not give our lives to God, but to something else. And Jesus serves as a model of humanity in this regard. He shows us how to respond. You shall worship the Lord, and him alone shall you serve. There's this beautiful, simple tune. You can have all this world, but give me Jesus. In the morning when I rise, give me Jesus. When I'm alone, give me Jesus. And when my life comes to an end, the world can be yours, but give me Jesus.